Hey everyone, Ryan here. Welcome back to Plague Scythe Studios and to another installment of my top 5. Today, I'm going to be showcasing a few of the unsung pedals in my collection, ones that I use all the time either for just playing jamming purposes or for songwriting, some of which I've used in covers and personal recordings, and I think they all do a really good job. They're either good value or sound cool and different, and maybe I just don't have enough to say about them to make their own standalone review content video, but I still think they deserve a little bit of time in the spotlight, so hence the video. To keep things as fair as possible, I'm simply going to go through these pedals in the chronological order they would reside in a signal chain, basically where they would be on a pedal board. So my first pick isn't necessarily my favorite, the last pedal I cover isn't necessarily my least favorite, this is simply how they would be arranged. And that's why we're going to start with the TC Electronic Polytune 3. Yeah, a freaking tuner pedal made it in this video because this is a badass little tuner. I'm kind of spoiled to have, having tuners built into multi-effects units and having stuff in, VST plugin form to where you don't even have to worry about hardware. But if you're playing through real amplifiers, if you're gigging and you're using a real pedal board, then, you need a tuner. And this one is a great choice because it has a really cool little feature, hence the name Polytune, where you can actually tune 6 strings at the same time, and it's fairly responsive, a lot better than I thought it would be. I've used Boss tuners and all the stuff I have built in, but I liked it enough that I picked one up just to have it, loose and available for whenever I want to use it. Being the extended range guitar player I am, it doesn't work so well for that. But if you're playing a normal 6-string guitar, it doesn't matter, in my experience, if it's in standard E tuning, half step down, D, drop D, open C, open B, all the stuff that I would normally play, you can see whether or not each of the strings are in tune. And that's really great because if you're either tracking a demo or you're in a gigging environment and you want to make sure you're in tune quickly, then you don't have to go through every string to see. You can just strum, an open chord or whatever, and you can see, oh, okay, I've got these 2 strings are in the red, I need to tune up there. Or if you're, extended range guitarist, then you can do the top 6 strings and then deal with the bottom 2 individually. But it's still faster, it's very accurate, it is, quick to tell you how out of tune you are, and it's easy to see, you got a lovely screen. But if you don't need a display that large or you're simply limited on room on your pedal board, they actually make a miniature version of this that, as far as I can tell, doesn't really sacrifice any of the features, unlike some of their other micro pedal lines. And it's more in line with the size of something like this, not quite as small, but it will fit right in if you're using miniature pedals. And I don't use this thing to its full potential. There's different options. There's USB connections for firmware updates and all sorts of other stuff you can do, alternate tunings and stuff like that. But right out of the box, it just works, and that's what a tuner should do, get the hell out of the way when I'm not using it. This is a buffered pedal, which is good for the first thing in your signal chain. And yeah, I have nothing negative to say about it. It really is a robust piece of gear, and it tunes. What more can you ask? Up next is yet another product from TC Electronic, and they've been getting a lot of screen time on this channel here recently now that I think about it. This is the SPARC Clean Boost, and I've used this on a couple covers already. Actually, I play with it all the time. It's simple. It does, a couple tricks really well, but what it does is really good tone. So as a lot of you probably know, a clean boost isn't something like a clipping diode overdrive where that introduces clipping and you get, the warm breakup and all that stuff. A clean boost really just is a level boost. So you're taking your guitar signal and amplifying it before it goes into the front of an amp. And on a clean channel, that just makes it louder as long as the clean channel, the amplifier can handle it. But if you're doing this on a distorted channel, something like a rectifier high gain channel, then this can kind of act as a sculpted EQ to boost the frequencies you want, drop out the ones you don't. And you got some different options on here that makes this stand out from other regular clean boost pedals. As far as I can tell, they actually started this pedal with the architecture from their older line driver boost distortion series that a lot of bands used to use, and they're kind of a collector's item now. The SPARC retains the same bass and treble EQ controls as their older boost, though I'm not sure if it's affecting the same band of frequencies. And you have this really cool mini switch that allows you to choose between kind of 3 different profiles. So in the center, it's just completely flat, so it says clean. and bass and treble just sound like it's doing some shelving stuff. Mid kind of gives you a tube screamer mid boost though, and I use that a lot for driving the front end of amplifiers that say I don't necessarily want to introduce all that clipping that comes in with a clipping diode pedal, or I don't quite want the extreme tilt EQ that's going on with those pedals. This is a really cool alternative and allows you to sculpt a little bit more than just a single tone knob would allow you. And the fat position appears to be a similar thing to the mid boost, except probably shifted down in the frequency spectrum. I've never actually analyzed it to see what it's doing, but maybe that'll be a cool thing to do on an upcoming pedal head. And then with the gain control, if you turn it up too far, you do start to get a little bit of fizz, a little bit of unwanted flub for a clean boost, but I don't know what they're using in terms of op amps, you know, silicon stuff to get that level boost, but it, you know, it is desirable. It can be if you're running in front of something like a clean Fender amp and you want some distorted blues tones, it can kind of do that. But for me, I always leave gain fairly low and just let the amplifier do the rest of the talking. My favorite uses for this is, as I said, driving a distorted amplifier for either leads or rhythm sections when I don't want to introduce all the stuff that something like a tube screamer does, or for especially like single coil tones, you can get a lot more bottom end and a lot more bite if you use something like that, or even clipping or flipping to the mid boost will allow you to get more of that humbucker sound. Or you can do the opposite on a humbucker equipped guitar with something like that in the clean position and make it a bit more sparkly. So if you're using this in an always on configuration, you're gonna have to be a little bit more selective, but it's really good for those recording applications where you just want to bring a bit more of the top end out of one thing, or, you know, boost a certain band of frequencies on another. So it's simple, it's transparent, it does what it needs to do, but it's a pretty good value, and I think it's one of the better clean boosts out there for the money. This next stomp box has quickly become one of my favorites in my collection, although I've never actually played through it on the channel yet, I don't think. I do have an upcoming cover using this for a clean part, and I think you'll like the tone as much as I do, because it just sounds freaking wonderful. This is the Bogner Harlow clean boost thing. I use that phrase loosely because this is nothing like the TC SPARC. This is, as many have described it, a compressor for people like me who don't like compressors. So this is among one of kind of the newer line of Bogner pedals, except this was designed in conjunction with Rupert Neve. And if you don't know that name, you should, because that guy's an absolute audio pioneer and you know, associated with so much high quality equipment and great sounding stuff. But basically they stuck a freaking transformer in this pedal, and it sounds unlike anything I've ever heard, and that's where that bloom control comes in. So you have like your standard level, you've got tone, which kind of sounds like a lighter version of the tube screamer thing. The more clockwise you go, the less bottom end and more top end you get. It's not quite as pronounced, and again, never done an analysis on it, but maybe this will prompt me to do so. But this bloom basically brings in how much signal is coming into the transformer, and what happens is, like, the best way to describe it without listening to it, and of course you'll hear it, is like a normal compressor. If you're set to a 2.5 to 1 or 3 to 1 ratio, it's as if they take the peaks of the waveform and then squash it down to the rest of the waveform and then kind of amplify the signal, right? It sounds squashed, which can be good. And I like a lot of country tones and clean stuff that does use a normal compressor before the amplifier. I tend to like compressor in the loop sounds for leads and stuff because it doesn't sound quite as squashed to my ears, but it's still less dynamics. It sounds like you've turned down an amp. It's like having one of those loudness filters on home stereo, stuff like that. That's what it reminds me of. It's not a high quality thing for me. Now, once you put it in the mix and whatever, it sounds fine, but playing through it's just not that inspiring to me. This is completely the opposite. It sounds like it's taking all the low parts, all the low points in a waveform and grabbing it by the shirt collar and, you know, bringing it up to be as loud as the rest of them. But it's completely natural sounding. It's as if you've turned up the master volume on a tube amp up to 10 and you're just getting this lovely sag and just you know, I don't know, it's hard to explain playing through this pedal. The sounds don't do it completely justice to me, and it adds a whole new layer to clean finger picked passages, even just regular picked stuff. And I don't like it quite as much for distorted tones. It works, but you know, you're getting a lot of natural compression with you know, high gain amps anyway. But for cleans, this is like an always on pedal for me anymore, depending on what I'm playing. But anymore, if I'm not using something like a tube screamer to dirty up the clean channel a little bit, this is like an always on pedal for me. And I'll definitely be looking into more Bogner pedals as they release, and even the existing lines, because I was very impressed with this. It's unlike anything I've played through, and it just sounds freaking awesome. So if you can snag one of these for a reasonable price, and they are a bit pricey, but I think they're worth it if you do a lot of clean stuff. So big recommendation from me for this thing if you use it. Up next is a noise gate, or probably more accurately, a noise isolator from MXR called the Noise Clamp. And I don't get really excited about noise gates. They either work or they don't. And in the world of Fortin Zools and ISP decimators, to me, there's not really a whole lot of room for competition. They either work really well and they're really transparent, or they just kind of suck. There's not much of in between, but this does something fairly cool. And I think the Boss noise suppressor also has a similar mode. So instead of like running this after the loop of an amplifier, or simply before or after an overdrive pedal to be a hard, you know, on or off stop, this thing actually has an effects loop, which is kind of cool. So this has a send and return, and basically what you do is you put all the noisy elements in that effects loop. So let's say I want to run an overdrive pedal. You'd actually take the input and put send to input, or over here, which kind of makes it like you have to do it that way. But then you'd run the return to the output, and basically if you don't play loud enough, you'll actually bypass the pedal completely. It's a kind of a weird thing. And then that trigger sets the threshold for when this pedal basically turns on and off. And it's a totally different philosophy than something like the, you know, ISP decimator, which is just a hard on and off. But it's a kind of cool thing because it still allows you to have feedback on the amplifier. It's still a very natural, you know, decay once you stop your pick attack, but you don't introduce any more noise into the signal chain after that point, because if you notice, a lot of high gain amps really aren't that noisy. Now, if you crank them up really loud, then you'll be able to hear some hiss or whatever. But if you're playing at reasonable volumes and you have it set to the sort of gain you normally would for running an overdrive in front, then they're actually fairly reasonable. It's once you turn on that, you know, 15 decibel boost overdrive that you get the ree sound. So if you just isolate those noisy components when you don't need them, then you can retain a very organic, lifelike, you know, amplifier sound without this artificial start-stop thing going on, which maybe that's what you're going for, but a lot of people just aren't. So it's really good for that, I think. You can actually run this in the loop. It's just a very screwed up setup. You basically run your guitar and the input, you run the send to the input of the amplifier, and then your output and return are what you run in the effects loop. So it's essentially like running the entire amp and pedal chain in the loop of this thing. And it doesn't work nearly as well as something like a Fortin Zool or the Fractal Audio noise gates, but it does technically work. It's just the decay times too much, and it's really not meant to handle that high of a signal level, but it kind of works. For me though, This works much better in the intended use case, which is, you know, I can't fault them for that. That's what they're advertising it for. As I alluded to earlier, there's a weird thing with this pedal that if you set the trigger threshold just right and you roll off on the volume of your guitar, and it's going to take some experimenting to find exactly where those settings are, you can actually bypass the pedals that are in the effects loop of this thing without having to stomp them on and off. So say you got a single channel JCM 800 style amplifier and you're boosting it to get you know, your lead and rhythm sound, then you want to go to, you know, kind of a cleaner type thing. Then say you roll off on your neck pickup to like 5 or 6 on the volume, you flip up to your neck pickup, and if you got the threshold set just right, you don't pick too hard, you actually get a clean sound. It's really weird. It's kind of cool, and it's something that I would have a hard time trusting in a live situation, considering that if you go too much, you will activate the input of the effects loop. So it's kind of smart, and I hope they expand upon that, or other manufacturers do, but it's definitely a niche use case. But other than that, I really like the isolation concept because it works really well for me. The only watch out there is if you have a really high output pedal. Say you take one of those like the Fortin 33 pedal that goes up to 22 decibels, you're going to get some clipping, you're going to get some helicopter sounds once you hit the, you know, kind of the limit, the threshold of what this pedal can handle. But other than that, regular 2 screamer, most clean boost play just fine. Our final unsung pedal for the day is the Boss DD7 digital delay. And as some of you might be able to notice, I'm throwing together a bit of a Boss pedal collection for an upcoming pedal board build at some point, hopefully within a few months or so. And this one was kind of an obvious choice. I mean, I knew I was going with the modern classics like the SD1, the RV5, and I think this thing is just as iconic as, you know, like the Boss Dimension pedal. It really sounds great. It has independent stereo outputs, so you can take a stereo signal and input it and it'll do some cool stuff there. But what I really like is if you use the mono input, you get some great ping pong sounds. I've only ever used this for the channel a couple times, one of which was the pedal head for Pod versus the World, and I think this really showed its strengths in that episode because it you know, stayed right up there with the Fractal AX8 models, sounded better in some ways in my opinion, at least the way I had it dialed in. And that was only a fraction of what this can do. You've got a reverse model, which sounds super cool, analog, which is like your high frequency, low frequency roll off, a modulation, so you don't even need a chorus if it, you know, that works for you. All sorts of regular digital delay stuff, all kinds of things you can do with an expression pedal input. You can tap tempo, you can hold it and get this like up to, what is it, 40 seconds of delay that just kind of builds upon itself. It's super cool. This is a very versatile pedal, and I'll hardly use it to its full potential. But even if you don't, it's still one of the best sounding digital delays out there. It's just so, it's pristine, it's lush. It has, I don't know what they're doing to it in terms of post-processing, but it's just a very full, high definition type of delay that almost sounds better than your dry guitar signal. It's something you have to hear. So very impressed by this thing, and it's no wonder that the DD7 shows up on so many people's pedal boards. It's one of the better ones out there, especially in a stomp box that big. So they still command a pretty good price. That's the one downside of this, but if you're serious about delay, then this is kind of a one and done thing for most people, I would think, unless you need like cascading delay reverb sounds or some of the crazy stuff that Strymon does. But for a workhorse delay pedal, definitely one of my go-tos and certainly one of my favorites. So that'll do it for today's top 5. If you're interested in any of the products showcased in this video, I'll have the links down below. This isn't sponsored. This is just, stuff I like and I simply haven't really covered on the channel. So, go watch other review media if you want a bigger in-depth dive than the demos I've showed here. But hopefully it was still entertaining and informative in some ways. And if you have questions, comments, as always, leave them down below. We will see you next time. Thanks for watching. Bye.